Good morning, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues. I would like to welcome you to this side event of the CFS 43, Increasing Food Security and Nutrition Without Clearing Forest. Yes, we can. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you, and not to lose too much time, I would like to ask Mr. Kostas Tamoulis, the Assistant Director General ad interim of the Economic and Social Development Department of FAO, to deliver the opening remarks. Here, Mr. Tamoulis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everybody. I think before we start this event, we should call it, can we wake up at 8:30 and attend the event? Yes, we can. So I think that's the first. And because this event is about win-win, about, promoting food security and agriculture without deforesting, and because I'm an economist and I don't believe in win-wins, I will give you a little story from the economics clan, which talks about the doubts of win-win. So there you go. There was a very famous professor at the University of Chicago, a professor of finance called Fama, Eugene Fama, very famous because he talked about the markets, financial markets being perfect. You can't make a lot of money in the financial markets. Now, little that he knew, right? Some people made fortunes because the arbitrages are very small and people take the arbitrage and you don't have time. So he was working with one of his students in the campus at the University of Chicago. And his student said, Professor Fama, there is a $50 bill under that bush. He says, no, what kind of a student are you? You know that if there was a $50 bill, somebody else would have picked it up. So win-wins are difficult. People arbitrage away whatever they can. But let me say that with forestry, and this is a second event I actually participate, I'm now a believer that things can be done actually in harmony with agriculture. So it's a pleasure for me then to welcome everybody in this event. This is the last day of the CFS. Well, people are very tired. A lot of people have already gone. People go to parties, ostensibly to meet other people and negotiate documents and prepare for the next day, but at the end of the day, they drink a lot, and so they come in a little bit tired. So before I start, though, I want to say that the best side events in CFS, since I was a secretary for 7 years, come last. We try to put them last so people can get attracted to them. I would like to extend a sincere thanks to all the participants and the organizers for giving me also a chance to say a few words on this topic. The title of the side event, Increasing Food Security and Nutrition Without Clearing Forests, Yes, We Can, promises an exciting news. It means that deforestation could become something of the past, and that the target of the Sustainable Development Goal 15 on halting deforestation is achievable. This is strange, as I said, to hear from an economist, but actually the state of world forests shows very many cases where this is actually happening, this win-win, this harmony between agriculture, food security, and forestry. And so the Forestry Department and my own department, Economic and Social Development, have a project together to try to get to the bottom of it and use as many data as we can, micro data, to try to understand what were the motivations for something like this. What were that changed people's behavior from greedy, economic behaving units to something that that promotes this harmony of not clearing land, forest land, to do agriculture, and more than everything else, what would be the policy frameworks that actually change people's behavior in order to do this, and to what extent they can be imitated. So today, then, from the doubts about win-win, we're singing a different tune. This complementarity and coherence, win-win, is also good news because forests are needed to support agriculture, and they have an important role to play in achieving food security. We look at the role of forest in regulating water flows, stabilize soils and the climate, provide habitat for pollinators and a gene pool for crops. Besides, their products provide nutritious food, fuel, medicine, and shelter. Allow me to recall here that an estimated 2.4 billion people use wood fuel for cooking their food, and 750 million use wood to boil their drinking water, all important for food utilization, which is a fundamental pillar of food security. These interlinkages are being increasingly recognized, not only by the forestry community, but also by those concerned with sustainable agriculture and improved food security and nutrition. The fact that in 2017, the high-level panel of experts will present a report on sustainable forestry for food security and nutrition, and we all fought very hard for the high-level panel of experts to take up such an important topic, will be discussed then in the 44th session of the CFS. And this is actually proof that this of heightened awareness and recognition of the role of forests. My colleague, Eva Müller, who kindly invited me to this, Director of the Forestry Policies and Resources Division, will tell us about the findings of FAO State of the World's Forest 2016, which shows that food security and nutrition can indeed be improved without losing more forests. More than 20 countries have already demonstrated that it can be done, and their success can be an inspiration for others. Forestry, as I said, and my own department will take a closer look at these 20 countries to find out the factors and the policies and the measures and the programs that actually made this possible. How did we modify behavioral patterns of economically motivated individuals to behave differently? What were the information, regulations, the carrots and the sticks, if you wish, that policy and program use, which beat self-interest and result in socially desirable outcomes? I, as an economist, am ready to be corrected and humbled by such findings. Representatives of two of these countries, the ones that they will be described in the State of World's Forests 2016, are here with us. So they will be joined by my friend Wang. You see, I have a lot of friends in here. FAO's Assistant Director General for Agriculture, Terry Sunderland from the Center for International Forestry Research, and Mike May from Future Gene, who will provide their views and perspectives from agriculture, research, and the private sector. We are also looking forward to hearing about your experiences and getting your insights during the debate. To conclude, I hope that this event will inspire all of us to join efforts to work towards more sustainable land use systems that make room for both forests and agriculture and that help to achieve food security. I wish you very fruitful discussions, and I'm convinced that everybody will get with a lot more knowledge out of this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stamoulis, for these inspiring remarks. We're also very pleased to see that your department also is moving closer to the forestry department, joining forces. This is very satisfying. And we also are very happy to welcome you to the small but growing club of believers of this harmony between forestry and agriculture, food security and nutrition. So thank you again very much. I would like now to ask Mrs. Eva Müller, Director of Forest Policy and Resource Division, to present us the last State of World Forest report, which was presented last COFO in last July, which is basically looking at this interface between agriculture and forest, which has been introduced by Mr. Stamoulis. So Eva, please.
Thank you, Dominique. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. I will provide you with a very brief summary of the outcomes of the State of the World's Forest 2016. And if you want to know more, copies are available, and it's also available on the web, of course. So let me start off by quoting Ms. Evelyn Guleka, who is the president of the World's Farmers Organization. She said, "It is time for a change in consciousness. It is a fact that agriculture and forestry can no longer be treated in isolation. Linking the two is imperative for socioeconomic development in the 21st century." Now, this resonates very well with the Sustainable Development Goals, which are comprehensive and cross-cutting, and it is clear that implementing the Sustainable Development Goals will require integrated approaches to land use and land management. The 2016 edition of the State of the World's Forests examines in more detail how this vision can be realized, focusing on the land use challenges and opportunities of forest and agriculture. Deforestation to gain new agricultural land has been part of human development for millennia. And until the 19th century, most of the deforestation took place in the temperate zones. But then there was a gradual shift, and now the greatest loss of forests and the greatest gain of agricultural land is in the tropical and low-income countries. And between 2000 and 2010, the net annual forest loss in tropical countries was 7 million hectares per year as compared to about 3 million hectares per year globally. And at the same time, the net gain in agricultural land was 6 million hectares. So there's obviously a connection between the two. And agriculture is still the main driver of deforestation. It's estimated that about 80% of deforestation is due to conversion to agricultural land. When we look a little bit closer at the forest conversion in tropics and subtropics, we see that there are different drivers for that. About 40% of forest loss is due to large-scale commercial production of agricultural commodities, including oil palm, soy, and so on, while 33% is due to small-scale and subsistence agriculture, and the rest is mainly infrastructure, mining, and urban expansion. And there are also some geographical differences. In Latin America, the forest conversion due to large-scale commercial agriculture is prevalent, while in Africa, it's more the small-scale agricultural processes that dominate deforestation. And as I said earlier, forest conversion is also related to income level. This graph here shows the net annual average change in agricultural and forest area in countries grouped by income category. And as you can see that the highest rate of forest loss, which is shown in dark green, and the highest gain in agricultural land, which is shown in light green, were in the low-income countries, while in the high-income countries, it's the reverse. When analyzing the governance and management of land use change, we found that many countries have agricultural policies, they have forest policies, and they may even have land use policies. The problem is, however, that most of these are not very well coordinated, and they may even be conflicting. So there's a strong need for better coordination of policies of the different sectors, and there's also a strong need for specific policies governing land use change. In addition to this, the legal frameworks are often very complex, unclear, and often quite weak, and that promotes more informal land use change practices, while at the same time the customary rights of local people, who are usually the most vulnerable parts of the population, are not very well recognized. We have always also seen that those countries that promote agricultural and forest investment at the same time and that provide an enabling environment are better able to address forest loss than those that don't do this. So that was the situation analysis, but we've also found that there are very good news. We use data from the Global Forest Resources Assessment on forest loss and 2 indicators of food security, namely the prevalence of undernourishment and the number of people that are undernourished. And we identified 20 countries that have improved food security, more than 20 countries, sorry, that have improved food security while maintaining or increasing forest cover. And 12 of these countries have even increased their forest cover by more than 10% during the past 25 years, while at the same time they have improved food security. And those include Algeria, Chile, China, the Dominican Republic, the Gambia, the Islamic Republic of Iran, Morocco, Thailand, Tunisia, Turkey, Uruguay, and Vietnam. And I would also like to mention Korea, because we have a representative from Korea on the panel that was a pioneer in achieving this. And it's not included here because it achieved this before, already in the 70s. Now, there are some common factors for the success. The first one is there has to be an effective legal and institutional framework. There needs to be a coordinated and balanced approach to agricultural and forest policies. And the countries who have achieved this have developed market-oriented agriculture with social and environmental safeguards. All of the case study countries we examined have experienced economic growth. And much of this growth has been due to economic reforms they carried out in the 80s and 90s that typically included strengthening the private sector, trade liberalization measures, and transformation of the public sector. In addition, a 5th important factor has been adequate funding and investment to increase agricultural productivity and to manage forests sustainably. And furthermore, stronger involvement of local communities and smallholders and the devolution of management rights to local communities have had positive effects. The countries also all used specific policy instruments, both for increasing agricultural production and also for strengthening sustainable forest management. And finally, there was land use planning and the promotion of integrated land use. So before closing, I would just want to highlight some of the key messages that came out of this analysis in SOFO 2016. The first one, and maybe the main one, is that food security can be achieved through agricultural intensification and other measures such as social protection, rather than through the expansion of agricultural areas at the expense of forests. So, meaning it's no longer necessary to cut forests or deforest in order to improve agricultural production. Also, the role of forests in the water cycle, soil conservation, carbon sequestration, and habitat protection make their sustainable management indispensable for agriculture and food security. As agriculture remains the main driver of deforestation, there is an urgent need to promote more positive interactions between agriculture and forestry, rather than having the 2 land uses and the 2 sectors competing. Referring to the SDGs are integrated and irreversible, and that means for agriculture and forestry that they have to be achieved at the same time: food security, sustainable agriculture, and sustainable forestry. We cannot say, let's achieve food security first and then we care about our forests, because the forests may not be there anymore. This all requires improved coordination between sector policies related to land use and clear legal frameworks governing land use change, including secure tenure. And finally, it requires integrated land use planning that involves the stakeholders and provides a strategic framework for balancing land uses at the different levels. So I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Eva, for giving us the result of the SOFO 2016. which I believe will probably remain as a landmark publication, because it's probably the first time that we have attempted to look at this interface between agriculture and forestry at global level. And I think the messages which are contained in this report are extremely valuable for member countries, certainly. And hopefully this will be also the beginning of reflection in the different sectors for a more integrated landscape management. Time is pressing, but I would like to take maybe one or two questions very quickly from the audience, if there is any. Question of clarification is fine. In that case, I think we will just move to the panel discussions. We have the chance to have a panel of very experienced experts today, this morning. It's probably, or we can call it actually also a high-level panel of experts in the terms of the CFS. And they are coming from the various sectors. We have a country representative who are going to share with us their country experience. We have a representative from research, from the private sectors, and of course from FAO. So I will briefly introduce these experts, these panelists. They all have very long CVs, so I try to make it as short as possible, so you will excuse me if I miss some of your achievements. I would like to introduce first Mr. Jung Hwan Kim from Republic of Korea. Mr. Kim is the Director General of the International Affairs Bureau of the Korea Forest Service. He has worked with KFS in various capacities since 1995, including the Forest Conservation Division and Forest Land Management Division. He holds a master's in forest resources, and currently his main interests are sharing Korea's reforestation experiences with the global community by engaging KFS in bilateral and multilateral cooperation. Welcome, Mr. Kim. Then I would like to introduce you Mrs. Joanna Valverde Stark, who's here on my right. Mrs. Valverde is Minister Counselor and Consul General at the Embassy of Costa Rica in Italy. She is an economist, master in foreign trade and in microfinance. She has been a diplomat for 14 years and worked in El Salvador, Belgium, and now in Italy as a Minister Counselor. She is an expert on climate change and food security. During the past 4 years, she was lead negotiator for the agriculture and finance in the UNFCCC and continues to work in environmental sector, mainly in renewable energies and climate-smart agriculture. Welcome, Mrs. Valverde. Dr. Ren Wang. Dr. Wang is Assistant Director General, Agriculture and Consumer Protection Department of FAO. He holds a PhD in entomology. Among many of his accomplishments, he pioneered China's program of managing invasive exotic plants using the classical biological control approach. Prior to joining FAO in 2013, he served in many high-level positions with the Joint Sino-American Biological Control Laboratory, the International Institute of Biological Control, the Center for Agriculture and Bioscience International, the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences, the International Rice Research Institute, the Consultative Group on International Agriculture Research, the Standing Committee of the China Science and Technology Association, and the China Association for Agricultural Technology Extension, and the China Rural Technology Services Association. So a very long experience. Thank you very much, Mr. Wen. Then we have Dr. Terry Sunderland. Dr. Sunderland is a team leader and principal scientist, sustainable landscapes and food systems at the Center for International Forestry Research. His primary focus is on applied research and leveraging policy influence. His main occupational interests lie in directly linking conservation with livelihoods-oriented development based on sound science, both biological and socioeconomic. In 2006, he moved to C4 headquarters in Indonesia, where he is leading research on sustainable landscapes and food systems. Welcome, Terry. And Dr. Mike May, he's a Vice President of Public Affairs of Futura Gene Susano. He obtained a PhD in biological science. His present area of focus are innovation governance frameworks, the post-2015 development agenda, the public acceptance of science, technology transfer, international cooperation, and the condition required for the creation of novel alliance between stakeholders. He is a member of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development Forest Solution Group. a member of the Private Sector Mechanism Committee on Biofuels of the Committee on Food Security, and a member of the Global Business Coalition for the Post-2015 Development Agenda. So again, welcome to all of you, and thank you very much for taking your time to be with us. And I would like maybe to first give them a round of applause before starting. And it's my pleasure to start with the country case studies. So I would like to start with the case of Republic of Korea. Mr. Kim, so in the 1950s and 1960s, it was alluded already before by Mrs. Müller, the Republic of Korea was one of the poorest and least developed countries in the world. After the war and after unsustainable management of its forest resources, half of the country forest cover has been lost, and what was left was highly degraded. The deforestation resulted in severe erosion and exacerbated damage from repetitive drought and floods, leading to decreased agricultural production and loss of lives and property. Today, the country is a remarkable example of successful forest rehabilitation, with healthy forests covering up to 63% of the country, and also for its rapid socioeconomic development, with a per capita GDP approaching $30,000. So, Mr. Kim, could you tell us why forest rehabilitation became a priority for the country's development, and the role forests played and are still playing, of course, for ensuring sustainable agriculture and food security? Mr. Kim.
Thank you. In this regard, I would like to tell the role of the forest in view of the stability of food security and food availability. For the stability of the food security, back into the 1950s to 70s, the half of the Korean forest cover had been lost, as we mentioned. People suffered from natural disasters. In particular, our country, Korea, was continuously hit by severe flood and drought. Mountains cover 70% of Korea's land, and the slope was mostly steep. So when there was no tree on those steep slopes, the soil was easily washed away, even the right rainfall. Moreover, trees plays an important role in containing rainwater. Without the trees, the rainwater does not sink into the earth, but flows away. Because of this, we had frequently drought, even though we had some rain. In those circumstances, the reforestation was considered essential to reduce damages from flood and droughts, and to protect farmland and thus protect food production. Our research, the research result of the Korea Forest Research Institute revealed that the region with the forest newly created show the increased quantity of water in the stream, and also a constant flow of water in the stream of the stream and river. And before coal briquettes was widely used in the household in the 1980s, the planting trees was directly linked to the secure the basic fuel of the cooking. And on the aspect of the food availability, also in 1950s and 70s, the food security was also a national agenda. So forestry sector also have to contribute to the as a food source. During our rehabilitation, the Korea Forest Service allowed the local people to plant fruit and nut trees in forest without converting the objectives of the land in the land use planning as forests. This means that the owner of the forest land cannot convert forest land to the agricultural field without any permission from the government. After we succeeded in rehabilitation, we also focus on the non-wood products. Still now, chestnut and walnut and pine nut and mushrooms and so on is important forest product for domestic use, domestic market and international market. In this regard, I would like to say that the most important aspect is participation of local people. We need to lead them to protect forests near their neighborhood. Based on our experience, we think that the governance is also important, but we think that making the relationship the local people with their forest, I think it is economic benefit. Because the benefit that we can expect by protecting forest. I mean, in Korea, during our campaign for rehabilitation, we focus on the law enforcement at the first stage to protect forest. And then after that, we try to organizing village people for tree planting and forest management in terms of the economic benefit of the forest. So the organization, we called it, the unit organization, we call it Salimge. It means the village forest section, which is kind of the social forestry unit. It was actually the initial stage of the social forestry. So Korean government made an economic relationship between village people and forests, not personally, but the village unit. I would like to focus on we focus with the Korea Forest Service at the time, focus on the village unit. So recently we introduced a new policy that we also making MOU with the village people, not personally, and then we allowed to catch some kind of natural products like natural pine mushrooms and things like that. Natural pine mushroom is very expensive, like $400 per 1 kilogram. So because of that, that kind of economic benefit, the local people focus on protecting their forests. If they lost their forest, they lost their income. And I already mentioned the forest section, village forest section. Now it has become a cooperative. So we have the national National Forestry Cooperative Federation based on that unit, so which has around 150 member cooperatives. The cooperatives focus on the forest management and wood product and non-wood product. I think this is the kind of the integrate approach in forest management and increasing forest resources and protecting forests by local people. So I think that the integrated approach is a really proper idea on this issue, respecting to our experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kim. I think all what you described actually fits very well with the messages which were delivered earlier by Mrs. Müller. I think it's a perfect example, I think, and we have a lot to learn from the Korean experience. Thank you very much. In terms of questions, we will wait till all panelists will speak, so then we can have a few questions at the end of the panel. I would like now to invite Mrs. Valverde. Mrs. Valverde, in Costa Rica, deforestation reached its peak in the 1980s, with the forest cover being reduced to about 21%, but has since reversed, with forest area increasing to reach nearly 54% of the country's land area in 2015. Conducive policies and stable funding for forests has been provided since 1997 through a system of payment for environmental services, PES, which have played an important role in this regard. So, Mrs. Valverde, could you please further elaborate on how sustainable forest management supports sustainable agriculture and food security in your country? And as your country has decided to become a carbon neutral country, what will be the role of forestry and agriculture to achieve this ambitious goal? Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to the Forestry Policy and Resources Division for this kind invitation to the site event. I'd like to start by referring to the deforestation rate that you mentioned that we had back in the 80s, which was indeed close to 70% of land in Costa Rica. Since then, we have done this 180-degree turn and are now at about 52.2%, pretty much. I think I'd like to share with you a little bit of how this came about, because it's important to refer to the policy and the framework which allowed for this change to occur, which has taken over 25 years, but it has taken us where we are right now. The payment for environmental services, which was born in '97, focused primarily on this concept of trying to bring farmers to protect the land, which was being completely eroded and deforested, mainly for livestock purposes. And this payment for environmental services has permitted over the past almost 20 years for over 950,000 hectares to be protected and to return to have secondary forest on this land. What's important is that almost 100,000 of these 950,000 hectares belong to the indigenous people, which lived in the most remote and isolated parts of my country, and also which were lived in extreme poverty levels. So it was very important for them to allow them an option to protect the forest that they had on their 1 hectare or 2 hectare land, which allowed them a small income, but that was steady over the years, and which would allow them also to guarantee food security. This in the most extreme cases of the indigenous people. Overall, this payment for environmental services, which is managed by a national forestry fund, has been extremely successful. It has reached, as I mentioned, almost 1 million of hectares in Costa Rica, and that created the framework to begin with the concept of protecting forest and increasing food production. And this was also within the framework of 2007, when we launched the idea of having a carbon neutral country. And why is this important in terms of forestry and food production and agriculture? Since our 2005 greenhouse gas inventories, we discovered that in our country, as in most countries, the highest sector of gas emitters was transportation, but the second sector was agriculture. So we had like 48% of our emissions come from transportation, 40% come from agriculture, and 80% of that 40% comes from the livestock sector. So this meant that we had to begin a work between the agriculture sector, which meant the livestock farmers, the coffee producers, the pineapple producers, and all of those sectors which were heavily impacting the environment in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. I coordinated for 2 years the NAMA in livestock, which means the National Appropriated Mitigation Actions, and then we had our NAMA for the coffee sector. And I want to share this with you because I think these kind of policies or trends or things that happen, for example, thinking of the UNFAO and what has happened over the past 21 years and where we are now, and the importance that all countries know that we have to reduce the global gas emissions. At the end is important when you can bring this not only from a policy level, but to the farmers level, and that's what we have been trying to do in Costa Rica. And that has also permitted us to find a mechanism where it's really a win-win situation, as opposed to what Mr. Costas was saying at the beginning when he began, and that is the livestock sector, the farmers, they said, well, we are probably in a big part part of the problem of the emissions in our country, but we want to be a solution. So what has happened, and I think this is what I want to share in terms of really a win-win and virtuous circle experience, is that for the past 4 years, all of the livestock sector, which of course we had to begin with all the associations, cooperatives, and then federations, we had dozens and dozens of workshops and said, you are, on the one hand, a large emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, but you're also the only chance we have if we want to increase forest coverage in my country. Because as it is right now, the livestock farmers have almost 1/3 of the territory in Costa Rica. So if we have already reached 52% of coverage, of forest coverage, if we want to go beyond that, the only way to do it is through the livestock farmers. So they know that, and they have said, okay, we're going to be part of the solution, and we're going to, and we've developed this national strategy for low emissions and carbon, is increase the coverage of trees on each farm, about 10 trees per hectare in specific varieties or species that for each region, that are indigenous of each region, to increase the silvopastoral arrangements, so more live fences around the farms. We have to have better pastures, which on the one hand, it mean there will be better feeding for the cattle, which these specific types of pastures also mean less emissions and less methane emissions for the livestock, but also more carbon in the soil. So it's really, we studied this and we decided these are the 5 actions which will make a radical change, not only in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but in terms of the small farmer, which has 1 cow, and really it is not, for them, it's not important how much does my cow emit. It's a matter of, will I have more income and security to increase the livelihoods of my family, and also guarantee food security? Because in most of the poorest farmers, perhaps they have 1 cow, and that is their means of subsistence. So it has been a wonderful experience to reach where we are right now in terms of finding this incredible conviction of all of the livestock producers, as well as all of the coffee producers. And in the case of the coffee Nama, it's exactly the same scenario, perhaps a little simpler, because all of the coffee producers in Costa Rica are all part of cooperatives. So it's a lot easier when you have the groups already organized into cooperatives, and you don't have to go to all the isolated places. But it has been the same case with the coffee producers for the past 4 years. They have believed 100% in being part of the solution of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, particularly from the use of nitrogenated fertilizers. And they have also come to this wonderful marriage between agriculture and forestry, and increasing, for example, the production of coffee with shaded varieties of coffee, so having more agroforestry and trees on the farms. So I just wanted to share with you from that perspective how it has been possible in Costa Rica to increase our food security and nutrition, working hand in hand between the forestry sector and agriculture. And of course, we have our public policies focused to the rural development and protection of agriculture. But the latest policy that we have just began implementing over 2 weeks ago, and I think is really also going to help us continue the path on which we are now, is a national strategy for agro-environmental and climate change articulation. And this has taken over a year of coordination between the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Environment. And we are focusing entirely on having this shared vision where you can increase productivity, and you have to think about the farmer, and you have to think about the increased production, as Mrs. Eva Mueller was stating previously. It's all about agriculture intensification, not necessarily agriculture expansion, but it has to be in hand with the Ministry of Environment, environmentalists, etc., in order for this to be able to work. So this is, in a nutshell, a picture of what we're doing in my country and how it has been successful through policy, but also through the conviction of the farmers in what they're doing. And so it's not just the usual top to bottom, it has to be bottom-up approach for all of these actions and programs and projects to really be able to have an impact and last through at least 1 decade or 2 decades, and to show the impact that we all require. So I thank you again, and I'm completely convinced that this is a virtuous circle of having forestry and agriculture and food security living together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Valverde, for this very interesting, very inspiring remarks. I think your country, has done, achieved, a great deal. I think they've been a pioneer in the past. I mean, in the 90s with the PS, Payment for Ecosystem Services, and I see that they're also pioneering now the carbon neutral economy, and certainly it's an example to look at. Very, very inspiring. Thank you very much. I would like to now talk to Mr. Dr. Wang, our Assistant Director General. Mr. Wang, as we have heard earlier with the SOFO 2016 report, that agriculture is a main driver of deforestation to satisfy the need of a growing population. However, countries are realizing that increased agriculture production cannot be done at the cost of deforestation, as we have heard just now. Could you let us know what are your views on the importance of sustainable forest management for sustainable agriculture and food security from UNFAO's perspective? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair. When I received the invitation from Eva Mueller and Costas, I went through piles of slides that I have collected through the years. Those slides were collected when I was working in the CGIR in the system, and in the cabbies, and in China, and so on and so forth. And I thought, well, for this sort of a 10 minutes presentation, I should not actually showing you slides, but rather with stories. So I decided that today here that I can tell you maybe 2 or 3 stories, short, not very long, and simply to echo or to perhaps to illustrate the messages that we all have heard from Eva a few minutes ago. The first is that I wanted to say that from my point of view as the head of the Agriculture and Consumer Protection Department of FAO, that certainly we now very much agree and believe, as we heard from Her Excellency the Minister Counselor, that achieving food security is indeed possible without clearing forests through sustainable intensification, through the agroecological approaches, and also community engagement, and of course, very importantly, the government policy support. Now, first of all, I would like to highlight all of these, what we have heard, and also what I'm going to tell you and through the messages, is a systematic or systems perspective, that we emphasize the importance of the harmony between agriculture and forestry and livestock. And as we heard this term, silvopastoralism, but nowadays we add one more, agro-silvopastoralism. So trees, crops, and livestock, they can be together and in a synergistic way. Secondly, is that it's not only that we can do, let's say, protecting forest, but also agriculture relies on forest, trees, providing the foundations, the enrichment of the soils, especially the biodiversity. So here comes my first story, that I used to work for quite a few years in the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines. And I used to travel to Vietnam every year almost. And one of the projects that we did there was an integrated pest management program for the rice paddies. And the fundamental principle of that project was based on landscape level pest management. In other words, we look at managing the plant hoppers in the rice paddies, not only by, let's say, looking at the pests in the paddies, but more of the insects and the beneficial insects which are harbored in the shrubs and trees that surrounding the paddies. So it is a integrated system that you broaden your views. So through that, and it was proven very successful that farmers were able to achieve a longer-term management of the pests without actually using or heavy use of pesticides. Now, the other point I want to highlight is indeed you have to increase agriculture production in order to feed the increasing population, right? But to do that, we emphasize not only the word intensification, but to add a sustainable intensification. Now, maybe you have noticed an article which appeared in the recent Economist magazine about agriculture and climate change. And in that article, the Economist magazine actually cited one of the reasons for the low productivity in sub-Saharan Africa of the crops is the low use of fertilizers. And they said the average chemical fertilizers used worldwide is about 124 or 125 kilos of active ingredients of nitrogen per hectare, whereas in Africa it's around 14 to 15 kilograms of chemical fertilizers per hectare. So meaning that, well, the article is saying you need to increase the input of chemical fertilizers to increase the fertility in order to improve the crop productivity. Well, that is true. However, we will say that fertilizer use is not the only solution. And there are other ways of agroecological approaches by also diversifications and sustainable management of soil nutrients in that concept also. But sustainable intensification is indeed an approach. Now here comes my second story, which is, again, with my experiences on rice in China, in Yunnan, southwest of China, where upland rice used to be really the staple crop for indigenous people. In the 1960s, or no, 1970s maybe, the government of China wanted to increase crop yield to avoid or to reduce slash and burn practices of the local farmers, of cutting or clearing forest. So they said the government encouraged local farmers to grow maize instead of upland rice, because upland rice yield was low, and so the government really subsidized for seeds of corn. And then the local people reacted to say, that is not our traditional food. We still like our upland rice. So many of them actually fled to Myanmar in order to avoid this kind of enforced planting of maize. Until then, in late 1980s, then the Agriculture Academy of the province started a program of improving the varieties, the yield of upland rice. And they succeeded after nearly 11 or 12 years of effort. And I, from Erie, it was early 2001 or 2002, I visited there, already saw the local government actually now subsidize farmers of building terraces on not too steep slopes and promoting the use of improved upland rice varieties. Now the difference of that is that the traditional upland rice yields about 1 ton per hectare, or up to maybe 1.5 tons per hectare. Now, this new variety yields about 6 tons per hectare, with, of course, about increase about 20 kilos of chemical fertilizers per hectare. And then the farmers were able to achieve 400 kilos of upland rice per person per year. And that ensured them to completely abandon the practice of slash and burn to protect forests. So that, I thought, was a very good story to show. So coming back, that all of that, also, we need to engage the rural community, to tell them the trade-offs, and then to show them the benefits of these innovative new approaches and new technologies, of course, with the support of the government policies. Now, in early September this year, I went back to Yunnan province again to attend an agroecology symposium that we held there. And then I was quite impressed by a new report that the same scientific team, the research team which developed new upland rice varieties, showed us at a symposium their new development of a perennial rice. And I was further surprised because, as we all know, rice is an annual crop, right? And you plant seed, you harvest. To the extent also on rice production, sometimes we can harvest second crop in the same year with the regrowth of some shoots, okay, above the ground. Okay, we call it ratooning in technical terms. So in other words, you know, one crop one seed you can harvest twice. But now this is a completely different crop. Through the hybridization, it's not transgenic, it's a traditional breeding, that they were able to develop this rice with deep roots, rhizomes. So it's a perennial. So you plant seed, and you transplant actually. You harvest one crop, two crop, and then the rice continues to survive for the next year. So you can actually harvest for 4 or 5 years. And then I was impressed because the potential of such a perennial rice in forest systems is tremendous. So from there, I see, again, innovative approaches that can provide even more substance to support this agro-silvopastoral system. So with all of that, I'm now certainly convinced that with these approaches that we indeed can achieve food security without clearing forests. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ron. I think very interesting again. I mean, we see that there are solutions. They are there. We need to find them. And a very promising one, which I think is going to be able, we're going to give the country the possibility to achieve what we are here discussing in terms of maintaining forest cover and at the same time increasing food production. Very interesting. What I also can see, the common thread between all the speakers we had is also the importance of involving the local population. And being from the social forestry team, I'm very happy to hear that this is absolutely a key prerequisite, that we really need to work with the local population because they have the knowledge and they have the understanding of what can be done. Thank you very much. Now I would like to move now to look a bit more from the research side, and I would like to ask Terry Sunderland. You published recently a study where you have found that there is a statistically significant positive relationship between tree cover and dietary diversity, and that fruit and vegetable consumption increase with tree cover until a peak of 45% tree cover and then declines. So these are very interesting findings. Could you give us more insight on how integrated landscape management is contributing to improve food security and nutrition? And let us know what are your recommendations regarding land use for sustainable food production systems. Terry?
Okay, well, thank you very much. And again, let me echo the thoughts of others. It's a very great pleasure to be here. For a forestry organization to be engaged in a discussion on food security is a great honor and shows how much the paradigm is shifting away from direct calorie production into a more diverse approach, systems approach to agriculture and food security, with forestry as an element of, as well. The research that you mentioned, we published in 2014, and basically much of the work that we've been thinking of in terms of food security is rooted in the paradigm of non-wood forest products, the contribution of minor forest products to forest management and income in terms of livelihoods, rural livelihoods. And for some reason, the nutritional value and dietary diversity value of many of these products was not really picked up upon for many, many years. And so about 5 years ago, we had a whole series of summits within the CGIAR looking at the importance of natural systems for the provision of food security. And it was obvious that there were two key elements. One was direct provisioning of food, fruits, tubers, medicinal plants, etc. But also the role of forest sustaining agriculture. So we have two main strands of research that we're looking at here. In order to understand the role of forests and dietary diversity, we initially took a very data-rich approach, and we took, resulting from a pilot study funded by USAID in Malawi, where they found a very neat correlation between proximity to tree cover and dietary diversity. We expanded that study up to 23 different countries in sub-Saharan Africa. We took the USAID Demographic Health Survey data, which focuses on nutrition for children under 5, which is a very comprehensive data set. And we overlaid that with MODIS data, remote sensing data, and looked at the proximity of pockets of higher nutrition and higher dietary diversity overlaid with proximity to trees and forests. And we found a very clear relationship in all 23 countries between dietary diversity and tree cover. The nature of that tree cover we're still investigating. Is it forests? Is it agroforestry systems? Is it trees on farms? We suspect that it's a mixture of all of those things in different ecotones, particularly between the dry forests and humid forests. But we published that paper and the results were very well received, particularly within CGIAR. When we're talking about dietary diversity, nutrition and trees have always been sidelined in many respects. And within the 15 centres of the CGIAR, we are on the periphery in terms of discussion. We were on the periphery in discussions of food security and nutrition. In order to look further into these relationships, we did a very similar study in Indonesia and found exactly the same correlations and exactly the same patterns, despite completely different agrarian systems. And interestingly, actually, we also found very strange parallels between a dietary transition, particularly in oil palm plantations. So, for example, when forests are converted to oil palm, we were seeing dietary simplification towards a more processed, high sugar, high carbohydrate diets because people had access to cash income as opposed to relying on foraging, collecting highly nutritious vegetables from forests and elsewhere. We also did a multi-country analysis using a data set used from the Poverty and Environment Network. This is 23 different countries spread across the tropics. And again, we found exactly the same correlations. Proximity to trees and forests actually resulted in better diets in terms of diversity. These are fairly powerful results. I mean, we're consistently finding the same things with different geographical situations, but also in terms of longevity. What I mean is, across both spatial and temporal scales, that dietary diversity was very much correlated to proximity to trees and agroforestry, and other forms of tree systems. And the other strand that I mentioned was looking at the forest sustaining agriculture. How do forests play a role in supporting agricultural production? And we found some fascinating and sometimes counterintuitive results. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence from the oil palm industry in Indonesia, and we've started to engage the private sector there, which we have to do. And they have been reporting significant yield drops the further away you get from forest systems, particularly forest patches. And In Ethiopia, we've been working with CIMMYT, with the wheat center. They're finding exactly the same phenomenon. The further away you get from tree patches, the yields of wheat diminish significantly. So we've been looking at understanding the ecosystem service contributions to those systems and trying to understand why. In the case of oil palm, it looks like pollination services are a particular problem. The pollination system in Southeast Asia for oil palm is deeply rooted in a very complex exchange between insects between Africa and Asia. And the thrips concerned rely on forest cover for their habitat, and then they come out of the forest, or those forest patches, to pollinate during the day. The further away you get from those forest patches, the pollination is reduced, hence the reduction in yields. So we currently have a whole series of studies looking at the quantification of those pollination services. In terms of wheat in Ethiopia, we suspect that it's climate regulation. The further away you get from forests, the intensity of temperature, especially between diurnal temperatures, create a lot more stress on the crops themselves, and that seems to be a major issue there. Obviously, people have mentioned also water regulation. That's a huge issue. Climate regulation and pests and services. We've been looking at cocoa systems in Sulawesi. Pest control in proximity to natural forest is much more effective than any other system of pesticides, etc. And so we're trying to integrate a much more systems approach to forestry and agriculture, and understand, breaking down the silos in terms of forestry and agriculture being a segregated and often segregated functions into a more landscape approach. And I think this landscape approach has been embraced not only by the CGIAR, but also by the broader conservation development and agricultural communities. So they're the main issues that we're concerned with from the research perspective, and that's translated in a whole series of initiatives looking at the roles of forests, trees, and food security and nutrition. The International Union of Forest Research Organizations commissioned a report 2 years ago, which for the forestry community showed how much food security and nutrition depended on forests and trees, and conversely the CFS commissioned a very comprehensive study looking at sustainable forestry and food security and nutrition. That's a process I currently chair, and will be launched next year at the 2017 CFS meeting. And I think that process itself is really highlighted, put on the center stage the role of forests and food security. And 4 or 5 years ago, when we as an institution started to talk about forest and food security and present some of the evidence that we were generating to the agricultural community, I have to say 2 or 3 times I was laughed off stage. There was no role for forests in agriculture. And it's absolutely fabulous now that paradigm is shifting, and we have a place at the table by generating a strong evidence base to show there are strong links between forests, trees, and food security and nutrition. And I think that there's a great role for many of us in this sector to embrace that systems approach, look at the broader landscape, and particularly understanding how the interactions between forestry and agriculture become much more explicit as opposed to being segregated. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry. Very, very interesting. Also, I think we need, of course, this research to give us evidences on what we are discussing here. And I think what you just presented to us is highly interesting. I mean, and it's really putting figures on perceptions. It's giving us a very good sense of what can be done and what needs to be done. It's very, very good. And also it gives us a hint of the forthcoming HLP report on forestry and sustainable agriculture and sustainable food security and nutrition, which will be then released next year at the next CFS. I think we will be waiting for that report with a lot of impatience. Thanks a lot. And then the last, but certainly not the least, we'd like to ask Mike May from the private sector mechanism. Mike, globally, agriculture, as we have seen a few times already this morning, agriculture remains the main driver of deforestation in the tropics. For example, in Latin America, commercial agriculture is responsible for 70% of the deforestation, with the beef, soy, and sugarcane being the main agricultural commodities. In this context, a recent movement on deforestation-free commodity production and trade is a commitment made by the private sector to fight deforestation and to ensure sustainable agriculture and food security. So could you explain to us why the private sector's initiative on deforestation-free commodity production and trade is important for sustainable agriculture and food security, and how this could be achieved? Right.
Thank you very much, and good morning. I think there's two parts to that question, and one is the why, and the other is the how. I think the why is very clear to everyone, that we need to drastically cut that rate of deforestation that's going on. And as we've heard this morning, in different parts of the world, there are different drivers for that deforestation. The private sector is part of the problem. It's also part of the solution. And I think in analyzing that, we can start to understand the why, the how, sorry. And then, you know, the title of this session this morning, I think the yes we can is an imperative. And so just to look a little bit at the how we're going to do that, I'll give a few examples. I think the first part to the how is how governments around the world integrate investment and infrastructure and the policies surrounding that. And we're seeing a lot of changes, and as we've heard from Costa Rica, the amazing example of how they've turned around that situation whilst maintaining food security. It is possible. I think the yes we can has been expressed very loudly in Spanish there. And I know certainly from my own experience in Brazil, the Portuguese version of it is that yes we can too. And this document here that I have, which I show quite regularly, is from the Brazilian Coalition on Climate, Forests and Agriculture. And it's a very powerful statement from, it's a multi-sectoral approach where the different sectors, whether it's food production, forestry, have come together to, under this umbrella with government, with civil society, to say that, you know, the future of Brazil is going to be low carbon and sustainable and inclusive. And this really is a blueprint of how the country is going to do that. And very much at the heart of that, in answer to the how, is the role of the private sector. Just to give one more comment on this question of investment, I think in the run-up to Paris last year, we all remember the momentum that was created, I think, by this commitment to say, look, we're going to clean our supply chains, we're going to make them deforestation-free. And we've seen a lot of substance behind those words. And, you know, there have been cases, there's the very famous case of the Greenpeace campaign on Nestle with the orangutan and the Kit Kat. It was immensely powerful, and you know, Nestle came out of that with an intact supply chain and a better supply chain, and their performance on the sustainability index actually went up. So I think, you know, talking of win-win situations, that was very much a win-win, and I think there is this general spirit of companies looking to find solutions and wanting to be part of the solution. In the investment community, you're now seeing, you know, criteria for environmental and social and governance, ESG principles and criteria. That's now coming into the way investors are putting money into agriculture and forestry projects. And that's going to effectively reshape the way that money flows are either stimulating or preventing deforestation. So it's doing everything all at once, all together, and yes, that's possible. I think there's one key component that, while we're still talking about policy and legislation, is an essential criteria here, and you can't have an effective deforestation-free approach if at the same time you have illegal logging. There has to be a massive attack on the whole illegal logging trade that goes on. The statistics are there, the studies have been done, it's going on, and it's undermining all of the efforts that are being made by both the public and the private sector to commit to this ambition. There needs to be a very strong block on that. Just another comment, and we've heard about research, and research and development is a very important part of this process, and I think most speakers this morning have talked about sustainable intensification, both in forestry and in agriculture. That is happening. There are a lot of approaches, precision agriculture, various forms of drip irrigation, using drones, using big data to actually analyze where to put fertilizers, all of this. That's going to revolutionize the way, and it is already revolutionizing the way in which crop yields can be enhanced whilst avoiding expansion of the agricultural area. Just to give one example of how that's worked in Brazil, in the 1970s, the average yield in a plantation was about 20 cubic meters per hectare per year. Today, it's about 45 on average. And the reason for that is through breeding of better varieties of trees, the development of clonal production systems, better forest management, and you can double that level of production just by conventional means. Obviously, other technologies are on their way that can further enhance that productivity. That's Brazil. Other parts of the world, the productivity is much lower. So there's a huge body of evidence that could be learnt from to raise productivity, for example, in parts of Africa, so that really no one gets left behind, I think. We hear a lot this week. I think another very, very important part of the equation, as you've mentioned, Dominique, is the inclusion of, it's not just for big companies to do this. There has to be a total engagement with the local communities and their involvement both in production and in the offtake of what's going on. And again, just to give an example from the Brazilian planted forest sector, up to 30% of the fibre that we source is actually coming from outgrowers, and many of whom are smallholders. And this has been established over many years now, and it's a trend that's likely to continue. Why? Because companies are not looking, whilst the demand for production is growing, companies are not looking to buy more land. It's just too expensive. So that means turning to local farmers and arranging ways to work with them so that they can produce fibre as well. So if Brazil is looking maybe to double its production of fibre in the coming years, a lot of that will be happening on the land of outgrowers and smallholders. So this is very much part of this whole coalition of policymakers and industry and the people of Brazil. I probably need to hurry up, but two other points. One is certification. Certification is and can be a very effective driver for better management practices both in the plantation and also for ensuring that the supply chains are exactly what they should be. You know, is there any illegal wood there? At present, the total volume of wood in the world that is certified is rather low. I think both FSC and PEFC and the other certification bodies around the world have a lot of work to do to try to increase the volume of wood that is certified as part of this effort to reduce deforestation. And one of the challenges they have is how to certify smallholders. So again, it's a question of smallholders and how to bring them in. Obviously, if you can certify their production, they get an added incentive to grow trees. So just finally, I think awareness. We've seen a lot of, you know, New York in 2014, people took to the streets to say we want deforestation free. The companies have made many pledges and there's now substance behind those words. But still there's a lot of work still needs to be done on raising awareness of this issue. That's an ongoing challenge. And really, you know, I think that's very much up to the companies as well to actually say what their role is in this transformation as it happens. When you look at the SDGs, there isn't a standalone goal on forests, as many people hoped might happen after Rio +20, but you know, and there is only one mention in the whole document of sustainable forest management, which is I find rather thin. That puts the pressure on companies, governments, and you know the people in each country to actually come together and fill that gap in the SDGs, because everything else points to the role of forestry and agriculture in achieving these climate and sustainability goals. So it's very much down to how countries organize themselves, like we've heard from Costa Rica, to actually pull off what many people think is impossible and achieve this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike, for this perspective from the private sectors. Again, probably one of the main, if not the main drivers in all these issues. I think what is also striking, I mean, what is important is this realization that, being part of the problems, you need to be part of the solution also, and to work out some constructive ways and inclusive ways to address the challenges in a joint effort and integrated ways. I think the the few approaches already chosen by some of the members of these private sectors are very encouraging. Hopefully, as you said, awareness raising will continue, and then more will join, so that more is achieved. But certainly the way is already shown, the direction is shown. So we've ended this panel session. So we have maybe a couple of minutes for a couple of questions. Unfortunately, not too much time, less than we wanted, but I still would like to give a chance to the attendants here to ask a couple of questions, if there is one or two. Yeah. Genio?
Yes, thank you very much, Dominic. Actually, it's more like a small comment, which I'll be happy to get the reaction of the panel on. Ms. Eva Müller at the beginning was highlighting, well, I'm Eugenio Sartoretto, I work for the Legal Development Branch Service in FAO. Ms. Eva Müller at the beginning was highlighting the importance of coherent and well-structured legal framework in order to ensure the coexistence with the forest and agricultural sector. And, well, of course, I agree very much on it. I was just saying that the legal framework starts from definitions. And it's very important that there's a common understanding of what's the agreed definition of forest and all other related sectors. And the time being, the forest definition, unfortunately, is very, well, encompasses very many different kinds of forests, ranging from natural forests up to monocultures, which of course sometimes reach up to the paradox where natural forest after conversion results into another forest. So I was just thinking that definitely FAO could play a role into making sure that definitions are much more harmonized throughout, and we'll be happy to get the comments of the panel on this. Thank you.
Questions or comments? Okay, so maybe, yeah, Safia.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if we have a fairly good understanding of the countries that did manage to improve forest cover, increase forest cover, and improve food security. How many of those did it through imports of wood and agricultural products versus through self-sufficiency within the country? Yeah, so just how many of the countries that succeeded in increasing forest cover and improving food security did it through imports versus internal supply of wood and agricultural products?
Okay, thank you. So maybe, Eva, could you briefly answer this question?
That's an interesting question, and I think this is part of what we are doing with ES now to deepen the case studies that we did. My understanding is that in most of the countries, it was actually the countries themselves that changed their policies to provide, let's say, incentives to produce wood and agricultural products more sustainably, and to incentivize more sustainable management of forests, and to provide incentives for more sustainable agriculture as well. How much of the food security improvement was due to imports, I don't have a concrete figure, but I don't think it has been the main factor. The main factor has really been policies in the countries that have been changed.
Thank you very much. So, well, I think we have to close, sorry, but we can meet after the meeting. So I would like, first of all, to thank the panelists who gave us a very, very rich, I think, presentations, very, very interesting examples, and very inspiring, I think, for all of them. So I would like to ask you to give them a round of applause. And I would like now to ask Eva Müller now to give us the closing remark for this side session. Eva?
Well, also from my side, thank you very much for these excellent presentations. And to me, this has been a fantastic session, because we started out with a bold statement saying, yes, we can. And I think the session provided the evidence for that. We have seen examples from countries who've actually achieved this. And we've heard a lot about not only that you can achieve it, but how you can achieve it. And some of the things that stuck with me were the importance of convincing the farmers and having the farmers directly involved. The importance of new approaches to agriculture, agroecological approaches, agro-silvicultural systems. And then we've heard some really fascinating research results that show clearly in figures, in numbers, the importance of forests for sustainable agriculture, which is something we've been saying, we've been preaching for the past years, but this provides us really with the evidence. And then finally, the role of the private sector, which is enormous, and the private sector is not only part of the problem, but can be part of the solution. And there are movements already happening for deforestation-free commodities, certification, and other measures that are being taken by the private sector. So that's all very good news. And I think for us now it is important to carry this powerful message forward to the next session of the CFS, where the report will also be presented. And I'm happy that we have Terry here, who is closely involved in this process, and where we would like to stimulate a strong discussion in the Committee on World Food Security on how this relationship can be strengthened? How can we use the knowledge that we already have about how it can be done to really have more achievement on the ground, so that maybe in 10 years we have 100 countries who have achieved food security and have maintained or increased their forest cover, and not only 20 and something. So I thank you very much for coming, and thanks again to the speakers. And then we see you in the next CFS session.
That's right.